As Hollywood is eyeing to bring Frankenstein's monster to the silver screen yet again, I think it would be a great time to discuss the design of the creature, who is mistakenly known as Frankenstein by the general population. To start off, it is important that we include some of the original descriptions of the character by Mary Shelley. Though very limited in scope and largely vague in details, these descriptions would serve as a basis for us to compare the depictions of the monster in various cinematic adaptations, and to eventually design our own accurate version. About the general size of the creature, Mary wrote, a gigantic stature, about 8 feet in height, and proportionably large. And this paragraph is dedicated to the visage of the monster. His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness, his watery eyes, that seemed almost of the same color as the dun-white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion, and straight black lips. To save you guys time memorizing these literary snippets, I have condensed every piece of information about the monster's appearance into this nice cheat sheet. There is one important detail to note here, though. That is the features of the monster were selected as beautiful, meaning Frankenstein himself never intended to create such a revolting creature. The ugliness only surfaced halfway through the project, so it could be argued that the monster is a gigantic botched plastic surgery rather than a messy patchwork of random parts. Let's take a look at some of the cinematic design of the monster. Since it is kind of impossible to cover every iteration of the character, I would only include the versions that I am familiar with, or versions that are more popular and are different from previous designs, which narrows it down to the Bors Karloff's design in 1931 and subsequent appearance in other Universal monster classics. Christopher Lee's design in the Hammer film series, Kenneth Branagh 1994 adaptation, and lastly, smaller productions such as the 2004 TV miniseries Frankenstein starring Luke Goss as the creature, and 2014 Penny Dreadful with Rory Kinnear in the same role. Bors Karloff's monster truly cemented not only the design, but the public perception of the character of years to come. The sluggish gait with arms reaching forward, the flat top head with visible stitches and bolts protruding from the neck, and the deep sunken eyes on a pale green skin are many traits that later became synonymous with the character. However, as iconic as it was, this design is clearly a far cry from Mary Shelley's original vision, lacking the yellow skin, wrinkled complexion, long hair, and other important features. The only similarity is the gigantic stature of the creature, albeit not to the level described in the book. More than 2 decades later, Christopher Lee would take up the mantle of the monster in The Curse of Frankenstein, 1957, with a different design. Lee's version of the character was more human-sized, still with scars covering his face, which was also pale and somewhat flabby. A very iconic design, perhaps only second to the 1931 version, but still nowhere near what Mary Shelley envisioned. The ambitious 1994 adaptation by Sir Kenneth Branagh should have been the most faithful to the author's vision, as the movie was theatrically released as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Unfortunately, the audience was yet again denied another opportunity to witness Shelley's imagination coming to life, since the monster, played by Robert De Niro, was more of a mixture between the Bors Karloff's and Christopher Lee's version. The character sported a buzz cut with a stitched scalp and face, looking relatively human despite having scars and deformities. Again, the monster looked nothing like Mary Shelley's description, even with her name attached to the project. The 2004 TV miniseries movie paid more attention to Shelley's work. The skin is yellowish, the hair is long and flowing, but that's where the design stopped being faithful. Still, it would have been a commendable effort if it had not been for the fact that Luke Goss was clearly too attractive to play something as hideous as Frankenstein's creation, and the audience would have had to suspend their disbelief a lot to believe that a rock star Tom Cruise look-alike would be hated and feared by everyone. The last depiction to be included in this list is Rory Kinnear's Caliban in the 2014 TV series Penny Dreadful. This time, The character gained yellow eyes, but lost the yellow complexion. The long hair was present too, but everything else was missing. There was no shriveled skin, no watery dull eyes, and obviously no 8 feet stature. So, it can be concluded that almost every major depiction of Frankenstein's monster was either inaccurate or heavily influenced by the inaccurate design before them. And the descriptions from Mary's original work was minimally employed for the last 100 years of Frankenstein's adaptations. Which begs the question, what would the Frankenstein's monster in Mary Shelley's novel actually look like? Let's return to our cheat sheet. First, the skin. The description is quite vague because we don't know what shade of yellow or how dark or bright the skin is. Which is why, for the sake of realism, I will go with the skin color of preserved medical corpse. Medical cadaver's skin is yellowish with a dark brown hue, and they are technically mummy, just not the ancient type. Perfect for the character, thematically and practically. Next, the stitches. Sure, stitches drive up the horror factor and make the creature more of a science abomination, but most designs treated them like zippers, which is kinda silly. Remember, Frankenstein wanted to make a beautiful creature, not a chaotic patchwork of random parts sewn together. Stitches and scars must have a reason for being there. They individually must tell a story of their own. I looked up images of arm transplant, and these are the kinds of stitches and scars such operations would have. I also looked up images of organs transplant. Kidney transplant would have a horizontal stitch, while lungs or heart would have a vertical one. These are stitches with reasons, not zippers placed on the body for shock value. Lastly, and probably the hardest to get right, the face. The information provided by Shelley is almost too vague to help us define the face of the monster, which means we would have to rely on our feelings for this task rather than real-life reference. The eyes of monster are described as dull, so let's go for big smoky pupils pointing to different directions while having a 1,000-yard stare. The corner of the eyes, or the end of the brow ridge, should droop a bit to indicate the benevolent and the tragic nature of the character. The mouth of monster should be in a frowned state, almost on the verge of crying or roaring. His teeth are perfectly white and his hair is lustrous black, as described. The overall objective here is something hard to look at or even frightening at first sight. But the more you look at him, the more you feel for him and the more you sympathize with him. It is like the reverse of a cinematic monster. But instead of building up the scare factor until the revelation shot, you want to hit the audience with something scary initially and slowly ease the audience into feeling for the character. So after combining everything, this should be how Frankenstein's monster would look like according to Mary Shelley's vision. I will put the cheat sheet here so you can cross-check my design with her description. It wasn't easy coming up with this design as I had to restrain myself from using more common artistic tropes such as the metal frame or the protruding bolts, and from going wild with my imagination. In forcing myself to work with a concept that is very vaguely defined, and with low room for creative liberty, I discovered that even for a design that is seemingly solved by many artists before me, there are still depths I can explore. I can combine modern medical achievements with Mary Shelley's fantasy work, and I can use my language concept art to help communicate her message, her ideals, and morals. Almost every single detail here has a purpose, and this project has convinced me that art is not to be replaced by AI anytime soon, as long as there is intention behind the art. I would like to dedicate this concept to the filmmakers working on the upcoming Frankenstein adaptations, especially Guillermo del Toro, and to Mary Shelley, the author that brought this horror tale to life. Perhaps it is time the world saw the true Frankenstein's monster, not in cliches set by makeup artists, but in the form conceived by his true creator.